Now, it's time to go to today's perspective on the programme. And if I was to say to you HIV, cancer, diphtheria, tetanus, tuberculosis, influenza, yellow fever and the plague, well, you might not think they were very palatable subjects, especially for what is breakfast time. It is at least breakfast time here in France. But such subjects, of course, whilst being horrific, are also so fascinating to study and vital to try to stamp out or keep stamped out to save lives every year. Now, that's the aim of the world-renowned Pasteur Institute here in France, and also of my guest on Perspective today, Stewart Cole, who's dedicated his life to biology, microbiology, and fighting as well infectious diseases. You're now, since the start of this year, in fact, the Director General of the Pasteur Institute here in Paris. Thanks very much for coming in. Welcome to you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Tell us a little bit more then about what the Pasteur Institute is and what you think have been its biggest achievements.
Well, I mean, the Pasteur Institute will be celebrating its 130th anniversary this year, and obviously, as the name implies, it was founded by Louis Pasteur, who made major contributions in numerous areas, pasteurization, for instance, preserving foodstuffs. He's especially well known for his work on creating the field of microbiology, abolishing the idea of spontaneous generation for microorganisms, and in particular for his work in the development of vaccines. So several of the diseases which we mentioned in the introduction, we have very good vaccines to prevent these diseases, thanks to the work of Pasteur, the Institut Pasteur, and our colleagues.
So what do you think the biggest achievements then are of recent years? I mean, obviously, presumably the work against HIV, yeah, and more recently work against Ebola, perhaps?
Yes, certainly. So you rightly point out that the Institut Pasteur discovered the HIV virus, which was responsible for the AIDS epidemic. We developed very rapidly diagnostic tests which could detect infection, and these tests were then widely implemented and helped save millions of lives.
So what do you think are the biggest challenges nowadays? I mean, perhaps I was just thinking yesterday about what perhaps Ebola being the obvious one, which a lot of people are talking about at the moment, maybe measles as well because of the uprise of that. I mean, are those the biggest concerns for you, do you think? Right.
I mean, Ebola is especially worrying because it's such a pathogenic virus. We've seen these horrendous figures of the number of deaths in Western Africa in the last outbreak. There's been good progress made in developing a vaccine to protect people against the disease, and hopefully, if this is widely used, it will help control future outbreaks and prevent the disease from spreading further. The scary thing about viruses like the Ebola virus is the fact that nowadays people are so mobile. So if, for instance, somebody who was infected with Ebola went to one of these massive cities like Mumbai or Cairo and started an epidemic there, then we could this would be extremely scary.
And what about measles? I mean, is that something that...
Yeah, I mean, so measles is in recrudescence at the moment, and the reasons for this are various. So, for instance, in the industrialized countries, some parents are concerned that vaccines cause unwanted side effects and no longer vaccinate their infants against many of the common childhood diseases. This is, in my opinion, a terrible mistake because the safety records for most of these vaccines are excellent, and we have a long history of using them. It's very clear that vaccinating children against measles has a tremendously positive effect. A child that develops neurological brain damage as a result of a measles infection will be handicapped for life. And for me, this is a terrible risk to take unnecessarily.
And how difficult is that battle? Because, I mean, obviously you and your colleagues are trying to develop new vaccines and make sure that people take them. But at the same time, as you say, there are those that say vaccines aren't safe. Or I remember when we were covering Ebola, we even heard of people being taken out of Ebola centres and taken to witch doctors, for example, saying that's a better cure than these vaccines. How big a fight is that?
I mean, this is quite a complicated issue, as you just pointed out. It's much better to use evidence-based treatments than things which are based on faith, for instance. Evidence-based treatments have been rigorously tested against controls and shown to be much better. This is not the case of many of the traditional treatments.
And what about you yourself? I mean, you started, didn't you, this new job at the beginning of the year? It's a 4-year mandate. What's your aim? What's the next step?
So what we're doing is focusing on 3 specific areas. So one of these we've covered already, and this is emerging infectious diseases, things like Ebola and Zika and so on. We wish to intensify our research there to help prevent these diseases from causing havoc. The second aim, which we consider to be highly important, is to do more research into antimicrobial resistance, be it antibiotics, antivirals, antiparasitic drugs, or even insecticides. Insecticide resistance among insect vectors for infectious diseases is becoming more common. And our third strategic aim is to intensify our research in the area of neurosciences, and particularly around neurodegenerative diseases, because these things like Alzheimer's, which cause a tremendous problem throughout the world, and especially in the industrialized countries where people live so much longer nowadays.
Okay. Good to have you with us on the programme. Thanks very much for coming in and talking to us. That's Stewart Cole. He's the new, well, as of January, Director General of the Pasteur Institute here in Paris. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.